It is so good to have everyone here tonight. What was to be our last night of book club, but due to just a phenomenal conversation with Desmond Meade last week, we didn't even get to talk about the book, and so we're just doing 6 and 7 tonight. I see Chris is excited. I'm excited too because I got more reading. I haven't finished the book yet. So be sure, Vanessa, if you could put the book club sign up link in the chat just so folks can click on that and get signed up for our final week next week, I would really appreciate that. Because you do have to sign up for that last week in order to get the Zoom link and whatnot. So welcome to Building Bridges. My name's Wes, and if you haven't already, feel free to edit your name to include your preferred pronouns, because here at Building Bridges, we are all about belonging. And that's just one of the many ways we can create a culture of belonging, not only tonight, but as we go about the rest of our week. Real quick, Building Bridges, we're all about relational grassroots organizing and mobilizing and empower these grassroots organizers to go out and support campaigns and causes based in progressive values. And our values are what guide what we do and how we do things. You see at the bottom in that sandish color, those are our list of values that are from Pete Buttigieg's 2020 campaign rules of the road. We're a group that was inspired by his campaign, but we're a group that we want to build a broad and inclusive coalition of progressive organizers from across the country. So no matter who you supported, you are welcome here at Building Bridges, and we hope you feel that throughout our conversation tonight, and if you choose to join us in any other realms. And ultimately, we exist because we want to see a just and equitable democracy where everyone is valued and belong because we are an engaged electorate. Our lenses, we'll touch these in one of our wrap-up questions tonight, but we really want to look at issues, and as we read Abram's book, we want to look at how it affects our rural and urban communities. How does it affect this issue of belonging, creating that for all individuals? What does it say about democratic reform, and how does it continue the work towards racial equity? And so again, make sure you say your name in the chat if you haven't already done so. But just a few norms, you'll see that you're muted. We will be able to unmute you if you would like to contribute to tonight. We just ask that you do it responsibly so that we can hear from a multitude of people. We are recording our chat tonight, so if you need to or want to, feel free to turn your camera off and change your name. And then lastly, let's respect one another. Let's create that culture of belonging, and let's have some joy as we discuss chapter 6 and 7. So if you're new to Zoom, real quick again, at the bottom of your window, you should see a reactions button. Click on that and you can raise your hand. Or if you're joining us on your phone, you're gonna click I like to call it the ellipsis button, and then just pop raise hand. So that is an introduction, and I'm trying to escape out of here. There it goes. All right, now I get to see all your faces, so that makes me happy. That's why I like to get through it very quick. So we have a smaller group tonight, which is awesome, because I think what that's going to mean is we can have even better dialogue. So we might switch up the breakout rooms. We'll be talking through our private DMs, me and the other co-host. And so I want to give them an opportunity to real quick introduce themselves. Like I said, my name's Wes. I'm joining for Omaha, Nebraska. And, you know, I am very excited to talk about chapter 6 and 7 tonight, because Abrams has challenged me in what I have thought about some of the things that were discussed in these chapters. So very excited about that. And to hear from you all. So let's hear from Jamel, then we'll hear from Jana, and then we'll hear from Jenny.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jamel, and normally from Vienna, Virginia, but I'm up in the Syracuse area for a week or so. And happy to be with you all tonight. I've told you, I think, for some of you, I kind of got into building bridges. I still don't know how. I clicked on a link at some point and really, really just have loved this book club. And then with respect to this book and these particular chapters, what I love is that we're just seeing, we're discussing and reading about stuff that's just dominating the news right now. And I feel better able to talk about it with family and friends through discussions like this.
Thank you, Jamel.
Hi, I'm Jana. I'm in Lincoln, Nebraska, and love being a part of this. For me, it's all about really learning a lot. I just and I think probably these two chapters tonight really provided me with a lot of information, because there was so much I didn't know about census and gerrymandering in particular. Just I find those things for myself just real confusing and everything, but it was nice to really get into it in those chapters, and I feel like I have so much more. And also, like Jamel said, it makes it easier to communicate and talk to other people about it. Maybe you can simplify the explanation for them, and just help everyone to be a little bit more knowledgeable about those really important issues and things. So I'm happy to be here.
Hey team, I'm Jenny Okamoto. I'm out of Carmel, Indiana, and got started with building bridges after Pete dropped out of the primary, and organized with Joe Biden for the state of Indiana. I formed the grassroots group for both of those guys, and then joined Building Bridges. And I work with Kaz on leadership development. We run programs every Thursday. Actually, now we've got our schedule up and running. This Thursday, I'm doing a grassroots organizing for change about using tools to run your grassroots organization, like Mobilize and Slack and all those fun things. And I think Stacy is the bomb. I think she's fabulous. She's really great at explaining things where you can understand them. Much good for us, so we can translate that to other people. It's really important. Identity politics, I think it's something we really need to acknowledge, especially intersectionality, which is where you have a cross. People are more than one identity. They might be disabled, LGBTQ, or a person of color, and an immigrant or something like that. So we have this intersectionality occurring, and it's really important that we acknowledge the multi-layers that people have, these voters have. But it's really fascinating to me, and I think Stacy does a great job, and I would recommend this book to a lot of family and friends if they want to kind of get into understanding where she's coming from and progressive ideas. She's really good at that. So thanks for joining us tonight.
And thank you, Jenny, for helping us out. And I should just put a little shout out. If you really love this book club experience and you're an avid reader and want to continue to help us have an effective book club, let us know, because we are looking for more folks to join our team to help us know what books to pick out, to come up with the questions, to help guide our conversations in book rooms. So I'm just going to throw that out there. So we appreciate you, Jenny, filling in for us tonight too. Well, let's get started. And Jana, if you would, could you put the discussion guide in there if anyone wants to follow along visually? And it looks like that link is in there. But the first question we're gonna start with tonight is, feel free to use the chat to respond. And if you would like to verbally share with everyone, use that raise hand feature. But when did you first vote? And what led you to vote? And what were you feeling at the time, as you were going to vote, during voting, and after voting? Let's just hear real quick about everyone's first time voting experience. Ooh. There's some good stuff going in the chat. Thank you for those who have popped some thoughts in there. And if anyone wants to share part of that story, go ahead. All right, we're going to hear from Yana and then Tracy.
Hannah,
Thank you, Hannah.
it's okay. I was in the military the first time I voted during the Vietnam War. And I voted because I wanted to see an end to the war because I didn't want my husband to have to go back to Vietnam for another cycle.
Mm,
So that was my first vote.
thank you for sharing. We appreciate it, Yana. Go ahead, Tracy.
I personally couldn't wait to register to vote. My dad was a moderate Republican. My mother was a Kennedy Democrat. We debated politics in the house all the time. And if it wasn't for the fact that my birthday was on a Saturday, I would have registered on my birthday, but I had to wait an extra month. If I registered August 13th, 1976, and one campaign decided since it was a Friday, I was the official campaign scapegoat for having registered on Friday the 13th.
I'm impressed that you recall the specific date. So that obviously was a big moment.
I didn't have my license, so I had to depend on my dad to get me there, and he kept putting it off. I said, okay, I'm going today, get me there. So
Well, we appreciate you sharing, and it's fun reading in the chat as everyone's kind of recalling those moments and why they went and voted, how they even got registered for the first time. And I just think that it's a cool thing to reflect on. And
we used to watch the conventions together all the time, both of them, and we talked
okay.
about them from we think we started in 1972 actually, with the when both conventions were in Miami. They were quite active with protests and everything. My mother would say, "I'm going to bed. Tell me when it's over."
All right. Well, I'm glad you are engaged, Tracy, and involved, and I'm so glad to hear everyone else's stories. I think I first voted when I was in college, and so it was by absentee. So not as much fun, but it was a very that's when the first time I ever knew that there were actually a lot of liberals out there. I was raised conservative in a very small rural Nebraska town. So it was a very wide opening experience for me that there are people who did not like George W. Bush. I was astounded. And my thoughts changed since 2004. But very cool. And so we have about 27 folks here, and so glad that all of you could join us tonight. And so I think what we're going to decide to do is I think we're just going to stay in one whole group tonight. What is everyone's thoughts? Give me a thumbs up, or if you would like to go into breakout rooms, you can let us know that too. Okay. From the nonverbals that I could see, it looked like everyone's cool with that. So so glad for that. And so what we're gonna do to my co-host, since you kind of know the script that we're going on, I'm gonna start with question 1, but then I would love it if we could rotate where the rest of you join in facilitating that discussion. Okay. So, and we'll just go in the same order. Me, Jamel, Jana, Jenny. We'll go alphabetical. Sound good? All right. So, question number 1, and again, you can pop it in the chat because I did see briefly someone is new to us today, so welcome. I forget the name already, but you can answer in the chat. You don't even have to answer. You can just sit and enjoy our conversation, or you can use that raise hand feature to share your perspective. So we're going to start in chapter 6. And so thinking about how you grew up and whether you grew up in a homogeneous racial, social, economic environment, and when do you recall you understanding that not all people had the same experiences as you? So was there a particular moment where you realized there were folks different than how you grew up?
I see some light bulbs going off where people are like, oh yeah.
And this is a vulnerable thing, so
Yeah.
not everyone wants to share, but
Chris has her hand up. Chris was one of the light bulbs I saw.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. I was thinking that I need to give my mom more props than I ever thought, like from my message. But what I realized is that in third grade is when they started busing the black kids into my school. And they were fun and we got along and like it was probably hell for them. I don't know, but like it. And my brother got bussed out. I think it was an extra hour, and like my mom was fine with it. You know, she's like, "That's what we do. Like this is important." And so I was living in Omaha, which is very racially segregated even now. And so it was pretty substantial what was happening in Omaha at that time. And I look on it with really fond memories. I mean, I remember those kids' names more than anybody else's. And yeah, it was to me a good experience. And that's all.
Thanks for sharing, Chris. And yeah, I teach here in Omaha, and the Omahas, they're part of our city's story in the right for civil rights and equality is a good one. We might be in rural Nebraska. You may not think of us as flyover country, but we do have amazing stories. Malcolm X, born right here in Omaha, a huge advocate in that civil rights movement. Thanks, Chris. All right, Mike and Basil.
Well, I always felt different. I mean, for me, but that's because my parents are Syrian, and so and we weren't living in an area where there were lots of other Middle Eastern immigrants. There was one other family who we were very close to up the street, who were like third generation Syrian Lebanese immigrants. And but everybody else was just in like our immediate neighborhood were just it was almost all white neighborhood. And back when I grew up, this is in Maryland, and it was a small town, and it's less homogeneous now than it used to be, but it was probably like a 90% white town and 10% African American. And but yeah, I it was just sort of like, oh yeah, we're a little different. I mean, that was kind of how I grew up, because when I went home, I had all the quirkiness of an Arab family with all the fun that goes with that. What was really fun is actually with Mike, and he has a different experience. I don't want to speak for him, but he's got his step mom and her family in South Carolina, and I've discovered that that Southerners are the lost tribe of Arabs who found their way to the New World, because like there's just so many like similarities that just crack me up. Like the same kind of family drama, the same kind of portion control issues, the same, it's just same kind of honor code system. It just cracks me up. And so it was kind of an eye-opening thing for me. It's like, I'm totally comfortable here. These are my people. The only difference is they eat more fried foods as opposed to grilled stuff, but that's the only big thing. Anyway, I'll let you speak for yourself. You want to talk? Okay, all right. Okay, somebody else can go talk then.
Tracy has her hand raised, so go ahead.
I had an economic aspect to mine. My mother went back to work when I was, I'd say 5 or 6, and my youngest brother, there were 4 of us kids who was 3. I think if she stayed home, she would have killed us all. And but by the time my friends found out that in the 3rd or 4th grade that my mother worked, it was, why does your mother work? Are you poor? It's like no one's mom worked back then, and very few women in the workforce had children. So she had to navigate that whole aspect too. So that was the first time I found it felt different from my classmates, even though we were all white. My mother was the only one that worked.
Thank you for sharing your experience. All right, and then Lara.
Hi. So when I was growing up, like I kind of grew up in this like Pollyanna type environment with my family. There was like there was no drama in my family. Nobody argued. My aunts, uncles, cousins, nobody fought, nobody argued. Nobody in my entire family had ever been divorced. Like it was just like and I spent almost all of my time with my family. So and I mean, I knew that I knew people had different experiences in life. You know, I mean, I didn't know anybody that had a drug problem. I didn't know anybody that struggled with any kind of issue or whatever. And so when I became a nurse and go to my first job at the hospital and I got families like fist fighting over their sick mother in a patient room, you know, and I'm taking care of all these people that have all these different experiences. It was quite eye-opening for me just to, you know, to know something is out there, but to see it firsthand is a totally, you know, different, you know, way that you process it. So it was kind of eye-opening, even as an adult. You know, I had lived in that Pollyanna type family experience for 30 plus years. So.
Thank you for sharing. I forget that I mute myself, so if I type, you all aren't hearing my keyboard. So thank you, Lara. All right, well, we'll move on to question 2. Jamel.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, all right. Before I move on to question 2, which I'm going to actually paste in the room, or I thought I could paste it in. Yeah. I think one of the reasons why we asked that first question was, because the chapter, we're talking about identity and identity politics, and some of it is figuring out what your own identity, and some of that is you're reflecting on what other people's identity is as well. And so you might not have as strong opinion or feeling of your own identity until you begin to see people who have different identities or live differently from you. And so getting into this next question, Abrams, she acknowledges that identity politics has become a hostile phrase or a rallying cry for others. And how did you react when you heard that term? And has the book affected your view of it? I mean, do you accept the fact that maybe it is a rallying cry for others or a hostile phrase? And did any of you have that thought when you first read it? And has it changed at all since you read the book or since you read about it? And I'm gonna, Wes is really good at the silent, the awkward pause. So I'm gonna try to be good at that as well, but you gotta help me out. I see Jenny's got her hand up. I think Jenny can just talk.
No, I have the power to unmute myself, but
Yes.
yeah, I think they use it to keep people into silos. They find a way of siloing people based upon what their identity is. And what's really cool is if we can, of course, I'm a big fan of busting down those silos kind of thing. So yeah, that's my input.
And we see, I see Marcia, going, and then Mike and Basil.
I think, the identity politics can be, people can get in their silos, but I think one of the things that is effective on sort of breaking down that silo is instead of just, is trying to find commonalities or telling stories that other people outside of that silo can identify with, because maybe their experience has been a little different, but they have something in common. And that was actually something at the March for Women in 2017 that was the first time I'd really actually heard Kamala Harris, and I thought her speech at the March for Women was one of the best speeches, because it wasn't just sort of yelling, it was, sort of taking, the various identities and, speaking of sort of like, the common threads that run throughout, as far as, everybody wanting, good housing, everybody wants an education, medical needs that those can, cross-sect, no matter whether, the issues may be a little different, whether you're in the rural or urban areas, but there are certain, stories that people can relate to. And I thought, that's my 2 cents, I guess.
And Mike and Basil, and then Hannah.
That was a really interesting section of the book, because I had always thought of identity politics as this pejorative term that conservatives use when progressive people are trying to be inclusive of other groups. And the flip side of it is, like, I get why some people are like, why are those people, however you define them, so focused on their hyphens, I guess is the best way to put it. And, I think there's, how am I going to put it? I think part of it is that I feel, and I also feel like our identities change over time. I know mine has, but personally, but we were raised, at least I think I was raised, I should say, with this idea that a normal American, like what an American was white. And, like the civil rights movement kind of extended to say like, oh, and also African American. But it was always like, there was this norm that was basically white, male, of a certain, it was a different country. And, the country I grew up in, because I was born in 65, right? So the country I grew up in was probably 80% white when I was a kid. And now it's like 1 in 3 are not. But I think that, I think the problem is it's not that those people, however you define them, people of color or LGBT people or whoever, have identity politics. It's that they've always been excluded from the definition of what it is to be American. And I think that's the issue. So, and I like the way she like flips it on its head. It's like, well, the identity is kind of inherent in us, and we should embrace it. But I think identity politics goes so far, but you have to flip it around as like, well, how are we defining what it is to be American? And are we just? I feel like for most of our history, we've defined American as to mean only a certain subset of people who actually live here. We never defined. We only defined African Americans into the larger body of what it is to be American. Only starting in the civil rights movements, we only defined Native Americans and comparatively recently into that, and all these other groups, and we're getting the reaction of people who don't want other people who don't look like them or don't appear like them to be defined as American, and then they just label it's like, oh, that's identity politics. But I think the flip side is what is it to be an American. So
and our Asian American friends are experiencing that right now. So.
Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah.
Before I turn it over to Hannah, I just want to say, Chris said, she had to Google it, and I'm going to admit I had to Google it too, because I was like, what is this? And even after I Googled it, I still feel a little bit, I still feel a little bit uncomfortable with it, but just because I feel like there are just so many ways and you could be identified. But I think eventually I got from the book, yeah, you are motivated to push for issues that affect you the most. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. That's what I got from it. But let's hear from Hannah and Jordan then.
Okay. My take on identity politics is this. Whenever things are going against white people, they find a label for it. So here's just another thing that white people have labeled to say these people over here are conspiring. And so it doesn't really bother me because everybody is always going to coalesce around things that matter to them. I once had to tell a rabbi, we were in a class and he was just going on and on about Christians and Jesus and blah, blah, blah. And I said, you know what, Rabbi, look, you go out and you tell the world that the only people God cares about are Jews. These are his chosen people, and everybody else is chopped liver. So you can't now be upset with them because they want to have a God that cares about them too. And I knew that that was an extreme view, but I wanted the rabbi to understand, you put yourself out there so much as exclusive. You're this little club. What makes Black people have to have identity politics is the fact that Dred Scott is still on the books. Dred Scott says, even when we're free, we're not citizens of the United States, and that's still on the books. So if we were Americans and if we were given all these rights, why did we have to be given the right to vote? Because American citizens automatically have the right to vote. White females were in that group too, of people who couldn't vote, but they were considered Americans and they were considered human. So from my perspective, this is just another term that the majority has come up with to try to make themselves feel better about all the things that they've done in the past to oppress people who don't look like them. That's it.
Thank you for that, Hannah. That's a great. We got a few more hands up. I know. Why don't we go Jordan, Amy, and then Chris, and then we'll get on to the next question. But I see Wes looking at me like, let's stay on track. No, I'm just teasing because we love discussion, as you know. Okay, so Jordan.
I was thinking about how identity politics always seemed to be something that I needed to be careful of or worried about. Like, I didn't like being assumed, or I didn't like people assuming that I voted a certain way because I live in Nebraska or because of my race or my religion or anything under the sun. But then I started to think about how, like, after reading this, I was thinking about, well, which part of my identity, because it's opened my way of thinking about how I embrace the fact that we live with our multiple identities every day. So we don't just live with one identity. And so just like politics are a part of our everyday life. And so thinking about which identity did I really start to embrace that made me more aware and more open as I was coming more into politics and not just what my family raised me on thinking or not thinking. And so I was thinking about how it wasn't until I was in school studying art, and through art, I was really studying how it was, my work was interdisciplinary. It wasn't stuck on one medium, painting or drawing, and how I was really trying to get people to see how you could approach a work in multiple ways and it doesn't have to be one specific category. And so thinking about that and the people I interacted with and how like you interact with so many people in the arts field, that really got me thinking about opening up my own perspectives that was just happening on the same timeline. So I'm thinking about how embracing that identity that was so important to me, that was the forefront identity, that kind of filtered into how I was thinking about politics too. So that's where something I was fearful of actually really did play a factor in how I came into politics.
Yeah, I think it is, you know, when you put yourself out there a little bit, you know, when you think about, okay, how are you going to identify yourself? Amy and then Chris.
Hannah took the words right out of my mouth, but one of the things that, yes, I think identity politics has been turned into a pejorative term. And I agree that the reason it's become a pejorative term is the same reason that we had to, push for affirmative action, because the majority of people in the world are not white, heterosexual, middle class people. And it does, but one thing I wanted to add is when I was back in teacher preparation, we wanted our students to be well prepared for teaching in all kinds of environments, particularly urban environments, and the blinders that they had on, and the idea of I love all my kids, I love them all the same. We had to turn that on its head, okay? Because when you say I love them all the same, we treat all the same, you whitewash, the whole thing, and behind that assumption is the dominant culture, white, heterosexual, middle class. So I like embracing the term identity politics. I don't care that it's pejorative, and when it is done, I mean, when I get that like, oh, political correctness, identity politics, and the eye roll, I say, well, why are you rolling your eyes? Why does this make you uncomfortable? It's kind of like what we used to do with our students who wanted to treat everybody the same. We used to get them to unpack and realize they can't treat everyone the same because Black children have a fundamental different school experience of being hated in school by white teachers, and that can't be undone. So Hannah, I mean, I agree with everybody, but I also wanted to just throw out that whole idea of the whitewashing, of that what identity politics really means is an affirmation against the idea of the myth of the white middle class heterosexual community.
Thanks, Amy. That's hadn't thought about it that way before. You haven't explained it to me that way before. and Chris.
Hey, thanks. So my question comes from Hannah's comments. She's really I feel safe with her, that like she is so open that I can ask these questions where I feel very vulnerable. So here I am. So I made this comment in here about I didn't think I was doing identity politics, and I'd like to think that I'm doing issues politics, but I'm white privileged, right? So even just saying that, I put that out there, I'm like, oh my God, really, Chris? Like, do you know? Like, I don't know if I know, right? But what I do know is, and as you were just talking, Jamal, so this last week, Governor Reynolds in Iowa signed into law that no longer can we teach diversity in the schools, in the public schools. And so I went to a legislative coffee this weekend, and one of the superintendents of the school district asked, okay, so we have these laws that we have to teach, differences, and you're saying that now we don't? Like, how do we do this? What are you talking about? And the state has not given the teachers any tools yet, right? So it's like, yeah, good luck with that, whatever it means. So thanks, guys.
We'll turn it over to the next question, but that, that whole notion of the anti-diversity quotient was something, within the federal government, we were dealing with an executive order that essentially was imposing something. And of course, now in the new administration, we're kind of busily undoing that. But it was, I'll just say, as a federal worker, there are a lot of people who are very just frustrated by the whole notion of a pushback in the previous administration from something that we had everybody had been focusing on for years, and people benefiting from working towards more diversity. So it was interesting. Well, I think we need to turn it over to Jenny or Jana for the next question. Sorry.
That's okay. I put the question in the chat for the next one. So just pushing it further. Do you agree with Stacey Abrams in that we must embrace identity politics if we are to save our democracy and thrive? Do you agree with that, and explain why? And I'm watching, I can unmute you when you're ready to share. I see Hannah saying yes, yes, yes. Oh, Michael, here we go.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, I agree with that statement. I think that identity on a macro and a micro level, at both levels, is dynamic, and it changes. And I think democracies have to change with changing identities. And as long as there is inequity in any identity that is old or that is emerging, I think you have to have identity politics to address those inequities. And then this sort of gets back to the previous discussion. And I'm just going to reiterate, I agree with some of the previous statements where people were basically, in my mind, were saying, or maybe I'm rephrasing it, that identity politics is seen negatively by the dominant white male cisgendered middle class structure. And the term is used pejoratively whenever that privilege that they carry with them feels threatened or undermined. And democracy does that. Identity politics can ensure that democracy is responsive to everybody. So that's why I agree with Stacey on that.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And it seems like that's a popular, I see lots of yeses. Why not? Anyone else have any comment? Susan says, yes, we need to find a way to make everyone's identity count. Absolutely. Chris. Oh, we've got Mike and Basil.
I'll try to be quick this time.
You're fine.
Because I thought a lot about this, and it intersects with other readings I've had. I was reading the Israeli historian Shlomo Sands, I believe. Anyway, he was making this point, I'm reading stuff about, America is supposed to be a creedal nation. There's this idea in history that, like when we think of, say, the French, that they're just this group of people who were in this native habitat of theirs, which happens to be this place in Western Europe, as if different groups of people are like species of birds. They're endemic to a particular place, and that's not true of literally any nation in history. Like if you look more carefully at, say, like French history, you'd find all these different groups, from the Celts to the ancient Romans to the Franks to, all these groups that have come together over a course of history and created this country. And that's true of even very ethnically homogeneous places like Japan. even all of them at some level, what our advantage as a nation is that, you know, our founding, you know, our Constitution and is kind of has a promise which has never even started to be kept until the civil rights movement, truthfully, but it has this promise that no, all men are created equal, or at least half of the population would be equal. Because it didn't say all men and women, although we understand it that way now, but it's that we're not, you know, our founding documents didn't define us as this is a nation of white European men. I mean, the framers could have written it that way. They certainly understood it that way. But there was like a blank check put in the Constitution. But I think identity politics, you know, it's about the idea of expanding who we consider as American, and then kind of, you know, giving us something ultimately more durable for our country, and something better than, you know, I think the framers themselves, and I don't have like a reverential view of them because they were flawed individuals as well, but they also understood like the kind of the religious and the tribal schisms of Europe in the Middle Ages. They were coming out of that and of the Reformation, and they kind of wanted something different where everybody comes together on a more equal playing field. And I think identity politics becomes a vehicle by which we can make that come true. Okay, enough.
Awesome.
This is fun.
Thank you. If there wasn't anybody else, I was going to go back. I saw Jenny shared a little blurb from the book, and then Wes found the whole thing. If you saw in the chat, and I love this. It's like, I embrace identity politics from Stacy, because for the marginalized, the disadvantaged, and the minority groups still grappling for purchase in our politics, identity is the strongest defense against invisibility. And I remember reading that, and that's a pretty powerful statement. I saw Chris mention like, why not? Why wouldn't you do? And I think I've never, I'm so late to the game on the political stuff that I never thought of identity politics as being, you know, a bad word, you know. I am, you know, it was also new to me. And when that kind of started coming up again, you know, when I was getting involved in the primary and I would hear that, I didn't even really know what they were talking about, you know. It's like, what does this mean? And I've kind of grappled with it for a while, but yeah, to me, I think you just can't, we have to embrace it. Yeah. Hannah, got you?
Yeah, I just, you know, one of the things that at first I wanted to say to, I forget her name, who said she felt safe. I'm sorry. Thank you so much for that, because that's, you know, I hope you can feel safe with me. But I wanted to say this comment by Stacy is one of my favorites, because, you know, of all the things that has been said to me over the ages as a Jew, as a Native American, as an African American, is when people say to me, I don't see color. That means you don't see me. And I will, you know, I almost lost a job because I told my boss, if you can't see my color, then I don't exist for you. You know, when you tell me you don't see my color, you have really just erased me, and I will not allow you to do that. I told him I'm going to come in here every day blasting James Brown and the Temps. You will figure out who I am. But, you know, so I don't know that anyone in this group would ever say that, but please don't ever say that to a person of color. I'm proud of my skin. I'm extremely proud of who I am. You know, I heard one young lady say she had a Pollyanna upbringing. I didn't have a Pollyanna upbringing, but not like what she described, because I had a family. There were arguments in my family. That's where I learned how to handle conflict. That's where I learned how to work in situations that didn't necessarily work for me. So I had a real life upbringing. But it was Pollyanna for me because when I saw The Wire, you know, President Obama in one of his calls recommended that we all watch The Wire. And I watched it. And when I saw that, I was like, there's a world like that out there. But you know, most white people see that and they think all Black people live like that. That we all know drug addicts and criminals and we live in projects. So when Stacey talks about being a defense against invisibility, middle-class Blacks like myself, who've never been poor a day in their lives, we have to step up and say, we identify with our brothers and our sisters because who we are is much deeper than our economic status. This is what you did to us. This is why we're here. This is what we're identifying with. So it is an issue for us. But anyway, I'm like, I'll get carried away. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, Hannah. If there isn't anybody else, I think we might go to the next question, unless somebody else had something. Anybody? No? If not, then we'll go. Jenny can take on the last one for this chapter.
Great. Well, actually, we're going to start off chapter 7 now. We're going to talk about the census. I'm going to post the question in the chat for you guys. Amazing discussions about identity politics. Actually, I could sit here. I could spend the whole night listening to you guys. I'm learning so much stuff. Basically, Stacey talks about the census. Rather than react to the newest attack or spend the year before the count begging people to participate, we should never stop the census engagement work. Can you think of some ways we or your community can better continually engage with folks, especially those from marginalized communities? So yeah, I mean, I think the census is a great gate to getting and talking to people about politics and why it's important to kind of answer the census and therefore, eventually vote. But yeah, I'd love to hear some of your ideas about you think of like that continual engagement that we need to have especially in marginalized communities. So feel free to raise your hand. Don't have any responses on that one so far. That's a tough one because we talk a lot about that building bridges, making sure that we're talking to people while we're not asking them to vote for us, while we're not, asking something of them. Tiffany's got your hand raised, so I've just, unmuted you, I believe. Whoop, there we go, Tiffany. I'm going to ask you to unmute. There you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, as someone who has used the census information in business reporting and research reports and so on, I honestly had never thought about how impactful the census was until I read chapter 7. I just had no idea. So my vision of Stacey Abrams' statement is to use basically census education as a way of continuing to build and deepen the political activism within communities. Because if you don't know what you don't know, and so if you are so afraid if you think it's no big deal, you're not being counted, or you're afraid to be counted, and that's all you focus on, that's one thing. But if you then counter that with all of these things that you are left out of as a result, I mean, like in your local community, you can't get a park because instead of, she didn't use numbers, but instead of 400 children in a certain area, we thought there were only 50. That's really impactful and people can relate to that. So I basically see it as a way of continuing to build voter engagement by educating people about the census and how it directly and indirectly impacts their lives.
Very good point, because people don't want to participate if they don't know how important it is to them. We do a lot of that about, hey, if you vote for Ossoff, these things will happen for you in your day-to-day life. I think a lot of it is like, why? Yeah, so that's really great, Tiffany. Chris, I'm going to unmute you. There you go, my friend.
Thanks. So I had asked Wes early, like when they first started, if I could talk about what happened in my county Democratic elections this week. This month was when we had to have our bi-monthly whatever done. So we elected our standard slate. And then I was like, Darlene, what do you want to do? Because I didn't want to leave Darlene out. And she's like, well, can we do something about voting? Like, can we do some voter outreach? Like, yes, you are now the voter engagement czar. I can't even tell you the power that this 3-sentence title has given not only her, but like other people in my county are already like, how do I help? How do I help? What do you need? I've got connections. Tuesday, tomorrow, it's kind of late, but it's the high school voter registration day nationally. And already so what's happened is we've contacted the county auditor, who's pretty pissed about the law changes in Iowa. So, I mean, we're working on the energy that the governor has created, I'll admit, but there's a lot of education that has to happen now. And I mean, there's always education for voters, right? I mean, that's what Stacy's saying. So, I mean, I don't even know if we need to step out and talk about the census. That's important, but like, we just need to keep talking about voter engagement and registration. And so we're planning these things like within 5 days that I had no idea that these 2 people, plus me, wanted to do. And like more people, like other county people are asking, I don't know, it's just in a name. It's so weird and amazing.
Awesome. Well, we talk a lot about the power of your vote.
Mm-hmm.
And it really comes down to engaging people throughout the cycle, not just a particular
Yeah.
election, but all the time, about the power they have to facilitate change, to let individuals know, and also to become someone that creates that and talks to people. So yeah.
Right. And I'm sorry to come back, but
No, that's great.
I'm really big on leveraging what you already have. So I know I have 2 people that want to do this, right? I know I have more than that, but these 2 people have stepped up. But I know they knew two people, right? So I'm all about the next people. How do we get the next people? So we're training the trainers and the next thing and the next event. And do we have a kit for a pop-up voter registration event? Do we have, we contact the high schools. Like we're even like scheduled to talk to the city councils now. I mean, this has all happened on Tuesday, but all these things are scheduled.
That's awesome. Yep. Jordan, I'm going to unmute you. There we go.
I was thinking about how it's really difficult to get people really excited about something when they don't see the immediate results right away. So if the census just happened, to keep people engaged with the census when it's not going to happen for another 10 years or 9 years, then that's really hard. Like I think about my high school students, even trying to tell them like in the future, they can't see the future. So they're only in the now, right now. And I think everyone's kind of like that, especially when you put a 10-year gap on something. But I think it does have a lot of potential if you get people more knowledgeable about the census and the power and impact that it has, kind of going back to what Karen said in the chat there just a minute ago. I think it has a lot of potential to really get people revved up about local elections too, that people may not be as revved up about in the general year-to-year, month-to-month basis. But if they're seeing the impacts that the census has on their community, then they can see, oh, this had a big impact and redistricting happened because of this. So we really need to work even harder in our local elections to make things happen to serve our communities in a way that wasn't represented in the census.
Yeah, I think this is where the power of storytelling really comes in, because if you talk about facts and stuff, but I will remember Stacy's story about the kids playing in the street because they didn't get the numbers to build the park to put them in off the street. And so that's where I feel like, oh, this census impacted my life because so and so. They may remember that when it comes around again, but it's also like a door to that engagement and talking to people about it. So, yeah. I just remember we used the census a lot last year as kind of a precursor to the general election. We contacted people on a more benign level and nonpartisan. We're not asking you to vote for someone. So that was really that was one of the bonuses of the census. It was something that impacted them, that we needed them to engage in, but it wasn't a vote. We weren't like looking to trade off. Jamal, do you want to? We're going to go on, I think, to the next question, but do you want to provide some input?
Yeah, I was just going to say really quickly, as you think about the census and trying to make sure that we do a good job counting everybody, I mean, people really need to focus on that. And, it's something that you can raise with a congressman. So like, how do we know that we've done a good job in our area? Especially as we use new techniques or the online census stuff. Hey, that's great. But if you don't have internet connectivity, and there are large groups in our country who don't, is it going to lead to another form of exclusion? We've got to think about these things, and we need to be vocal about them.
Yeah, great, awesome. All right, I'm gonna Jamal, I think you're going to be the next question from chapter 7.
I did.
Or is it Wes?
I think it's Wes.
Yeah.
I love just being able to participate.
I know.
Facilitating. It's so nice.
It's going to be the next question's about gerrymandering.
Yes.
I can post it in the chat for you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Question 2. So related to the census, an issue that we are all probably talking about in our individual states is the issue of gerrymandering. And I would give you my little history lesson that I do to my students about it, but I think Stacy gave us a great short little intro. So what did you learn about gerrymandering, or what are you learning as a grassroots organizer in your respected state? Or do you not really know anything about it? And that's okay too. And yes, Massachusetts, Elbridge Gary. The better Wes out on the West Coast.
Yeah. Hi, West Coast West. Well, I come from Georgia, and one thing I know that we have a history of distorting the electoral process in just about every possible way that we are unfortunately living up to, from gerrymandering to, purging voters and everything else. But just out of the conversation, I just really like the fact that I think over the past few years, maybe we as progressives or Democrats somehow don't think we have permission, or somehow we need some permission to have these, to press for our ideas with public officials. There's somehow this kind of separation between the elected leadership, that the results of gerrymandering is that, if you live in a red area, I can't tell you how many times I thought, well, I'm going to call my congressman, except my congressman is the most Republican conservative congressman in the entire world, almost. So why do I bother calling? That's one of the effects of gerrymandering, is that if you live in a red area and have a progressive view, you don't even raise it with a public official. So they don't ever actually even know how many Democrats might live in their area, or they don't even listen to them. And one of the great things about Pete's campaign is that he spoke from that position of like, every race, every district, every area, every state, every community matters. And the fact that we are out there raising our voices, even when it doesn't seem to matter, does matter, because it gives other people in that same area authority, permission, groupiness, if you will. you know, there's quite a powerful feeling when you do make that call, and you know that other people are calling with you, and backing you up, even if it's a lost cause, even if it's not going to change that member of Congress's mind. It does let you know that you did what you fought the fight. You put the idea in that staff member's mind or in that Congress member's mind, that you showed up to at least let people know that there is an alternative. And I think that's one of the most powerful things. We go back to Georgia. It was in those like really rural districts that are hard and inefficient to organize, where I think the Democrats did particularly well in January. It is in those reddish areas where we hadn't done as much organizing, where it really, really paid off when there was a close race. So I think one of the things I really like about building bridges is that it gives people this sense of purposeful action, even when it doesn't seem like it's going to be important. It really is in the long run. So I really like the fact that's one of the negative things about gerrymandering is it tends to cut us off from participating in our own democracy. And I think that's what the Pete world is working against, even in those areas like Northwest Georgia, where Congresswoman, what's her name, is from. So anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Wes. And I hope you're also, I know it's hard to take in what we're hearing, because great thoughts, and then also all the great thoughts that are going on in the chat. Beautiful dialogue happening verbally and non-verbally. So, I just want to, Shannon said, it drives home the importance of our local elections, because it is them. It's the state legislature that pretty much determines districts. And so really make sure that we get involved locally and pay attention to what's going on in our state legislatures. And then I know someone mentioned Heffler, I believe is his name, and his daughter pretty much exposing everything that he was doing in North Carolina with the GOP there. I remember Jana, Jamel, and I were talking about that after our call last week, and how we were all like, holy cow. So very crazy. Yes, and North Carolina, obviously the Supreme Court got involved there, but Maryland is a very heavily gerrymandered state for Democrats. So gerrymandering is not an issue that it's not just one side. It is a red issue and a blue issue, and I think it really goes against that idea of belonging that Building Bridges really is passionate about, so that we can see all people in our districts, which West Coast West you alluded to. So I don't see any more hand raises. I know there's good conversation in the chat, so I'm going to say it's time to move on. Jamel.
Okay, so let me copy this, and I'll tell you, basically this is about the Electoral College. Stacey Abrams is a staunch supporter of ending the Electoral College. What are your feelings about this issue? Mike.
I can't resist. I cannot stand the Electoral College. It is the most it's one of the most anti-democratic institutions in the Constitution. I can't think of a single other country that has such a mechanism. Plenty of other countries are federalist in nature. There's plenty of states' rights or province rights in other federal countries. It was designed to protect rural voters, and hardly anybody's a rural voter anymore. It protects small states, but at the expense of large states. But my biggest concern right now is that the Electoral College gives it has a tendency to make us pay attention to maybe 6 to 10 swing states, right? It's 50 separate state elections. It's not a national presidential election. And so it ignores other states. And in those other states, I think the Electoral College has a negative impact on turnout and participation for down ticket ballots or down ticket elections. I just think it's the most anti-democratic institution. I really wish it would. I know it's not any likely chance that the Constitution will be amended to remove it, but there are other mechanisms to undermine its impact, its anti-democratic impact. So yeah, I feel very strongly. I hate that thing. Thank you.
Yeah, and we got Mike and Basil.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine actually raised a suggestion about the Electoral College, which I hadn't really thought of, but I think it's valid, and I wanted to raise it with my congressman. I just haven't yet. The number of electors that a state has is equal to the number of congressmen plus senators. And so if it was just number of House members, you wouldn't get mathematically or statistically, you would not get the outcome where someone who didn't win the national popular vote would win the Electoral College. But it's the fact that you have the 2 senators regardless of every state. And what a friend of mine raised is, well, we can, by legislation, change the number of representatives in the House and increase it. So if instead of 435, we had 900, for example, then the number of senators would be 100 out of 1,000 as opposed to 100 out of 535. And so that would mathematically wouldn't end the Electoral College, but it would statistically reduce its influence, because you would be much less likely to get an outcome like we had in 2016 or in 2000 when the loser of the popular vote won the Electoral College. So I just wanted to throw that idea out there and see what people thought about it as another, and I don't think it's exclusive. I think the National Compact is also a very good solution, but this is in theory something that, the Democrats, if they can get over their filibuster, could do, now they could amend the legislation which was passed, I think, in the 1920s that set the size of the House of Representatives at 435, and they could change that to whatever they wanted.
Hey, Basil, the National Compact, can you just provide 2 sentences and remind me what that one is?
The National Compact is this interstate compact, and actually there was a very good podcast about it by Chris Hayes, but a few months ago. But it's basically this interstate agreement between state legislatures that doesn't become effective until enough states equaling 270 votes in the Electoral College have agreed it. Basically, all the states pledge that instead of awarding their electoral votes to the winner at the state level, they award their electoral votes to the winner at the national level. And when 270 electoral votes worth of states do that, that would effectively nullify the Electoral College. And it wouldn't require a constitutional amendment because it's an agreement between states, and they have that power to do that.
What would it look like? I mean, so that's one way to deal with it. And what would it look like if all the states did what Maine and Nebraska do? Where essentially I think it's divided by their districts or something like that. Is anybody, Wes, can you explain that? And either Wes, West from West Coast or West from Midwest.
Nebraska, we're we're unique. We got the only unicameral in the country, one house legislature, and we do what's called a split electoral vote. And so what happens is whoever the popular vote for your whole state, they get 2 electoral votes because of your 2 senators. And then the popular vote in each district goes to that individual candidate. So that is how Joe Biden officially received 1 electoral vote from Nebraska, because in the big blue dot here in Omaha and pretty much all Douglas County, we voted for Joe Biden. However, I love our system, but it needs to go away, because whenever it all goes back to gerrymandering and to what populations we count and do not count. So let's take, for example, prisons. We already know our prison system is racist and discriminatory to BIPOC individuals. And so literally in Nebraska, they get, if I don't even know how the rules are, but as Stacy talked about, I never thought about it. If they get counted towards the population of where they are imprisoned in, that goes to Lincoln, not Omaha. And Omaha is the most diverse city in our whole state. And so it is based on getting rid of people, not enfranchising folks, and continuing to divest power away from those our country doesn't want. So it's cool that we do it. I think it's better than nothing, but absolutely get rid of it.
Other thoughts from the group?
Anybody in support of the Electoral College?
Yes, this is me. You know, I know it doesn't work. I mean, I've been very upset by it. I do think about, you know, some of the reasons why it came into existence, and I try to figure out, or I try to think about, well, what are some ways that we could change it to make it better? And I guess, you know, this whole notion of, you know, was it meant to help protect rural interests or smaller states or something like that? And I think, well, back at that time, you know, when the only way that you could really communicate with people or engage with them, you know, was, I mean, you know, through, you know, getting on a horse and getting there or something, you know, you could see how some of that protection was warranted. But it's just, you know, we now have so many more ways to be able to engage with people in different areas, and so many ways for them to have themselves heard. Yep, maybe we don't need that kind of protection, but the principle and maybe the way that it helped keep a young country together is something that I'm sympathetic to. So, and I'm kind of a traditionalist, but I know I don't like the way that it works right now. Mike and Basil.
It was Jesse Wegman who I listened to a podcast on Chris Hayes, but he's the name of the author who wrote about the Electoral College, and apparently it was kind of a, even Hamilton, like it was this last minute compromise in the Constitutional Convention, and a lot of it was basically a sop to the South because they were overrepresented because of the 3/5 compromise, because they were allowed to count slaves as part of their population, but not give them votes. So, and the Electoral College gave them extra influence.
And somebody, I see somebody in there, you know, that the history that I might have, you know, this rural thing, you know, might just be, you know, kind of washing over the real story. And you know, Mike, no, Jane, and Connie.
So I think there are several reasons for why it was put in the Constitution. One was to protect small states, not just rural states, but small states. But also it was because they wanted to protect the government from the sudden breeze of passion that the ignorant masses might elect a tyrant for. And the college has never been used to protect the government from the ignorant masses. In fact, 2016 proved otherwise. But I just ran some quick numbers, and if my calculation is correct, in Wyoming, one electoral college for every 192,000 people who live there. In California, one electoral college vote for every 700 and something thousand people who live there. So although I do think that rural voters or rural people, their needs are not addressed, I don't think that the emphasis that the Electoral College, the advantage that the Electoral College gives rural states at the expense of more populous states is equity, is fair. I think there are other ways to protect the needs of rural voters besides at the expense of more populous states and states that are not swing states.
Thank you. Hey, if there are no further things on that, I'll turn it back over to you, Wes. But I will put in a plug, because as we talk about, okay, what do we do about the Electoral College? What do we do about the census? What do we do about all these things? And then we have the whole issue of the filibuster to deal with. Everybody, we've told you all the next book is Kill Switch, which is just a really nice combo. And Wes has told us, you can start reading it now. But we've still got another week with Stacy's book. But I'm just looking forward to that discussion too. So I'll turn it over to Wes.
Phenomenal conversation. So good to hear from everyone's voices, whether you shared your truth and experiences verbally or in the chat. I really appreciate that. It's 8:55. So one thing I really loved about tonight's conversation is, continuing to talk about how what Abram shared, how it addresses that work towards racial equity, how these situations affect one's sense of belonging in our local communities, politically and personally. And, as Mike, just mentioned, there are other ways to ensure that rural voices and communities are heard and those issues are addressed rather than the Electoral College. And so I just, and of course, when we talk about voting and access to voting and whatnot, democratic reform is certainly right there as well. So just love how we're talking about it and hopefully thinking in those four areas as we continue to read. But there's more than just a book club that Building Bridges does. But I do want to just re-emphasize what Jamel ended with is we will be starting our next book on April 26th. I don't know if we could have better timed this. Honestly, I thought maybe we would have gotten rid of this dang thing. You already know my personal opinion on the filibuster. But I've been learning as we continue to hear more about it in the media and whatnot. But we'll be starting Kill Switch on April 26th. Be looking for that sign up link. We'll certainly get it out to you all since you signed up for this book. But if you're looking to get involved and to really bring about change and affect action, we got a few events here. I'm just going to shout out Letters for a Cause dance party. That our next one's going to be on April 9th, and we will be continuing to write to senators about the need for the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Because we have seen this week in Georgia. Also, Chris has mentioned what's going on in Iowa too. Nebraska has bills to suppress the vote. I think every state does. And so we really need to ensure action at that federal level to right the wrongs that the Supreme Court did when they reversed the Shelby decision that Amore so eloquently talked about 2 weeks ago. We're supporting down ballot candidates, and their elections are happening here soon. So if you want to support progressives running at the local level, it's a great way to get involved at those action events. And then Jenny and Kaz, I think, who is also on the call tonight, they do real talk events every Thursday of the month. And this week on Thursday, they're going to talk about how to organize in your local community. So, you know, if you're really passionate about voting rights and to protect that, name yourself the voting czar, like Chris did to one of her friends organizing in her county. And Jenny will give you the tools on how you can start leading as a voting czar in your local community. So we're on social media. I really hope you give us a follow, because one, I put a lot of posts on social media, and so does Vanessa. And so when you react with it and share it and whatnot and tag us and promote us, it makes us feel really good, because we choose to spend time making awesome, or what we think is awesome, content. So give us a follow. And that is all I have to share with you all. And so I think it is time to let you all unmute yourself so we can say goodbye to one another. And I think it's already done. So
Thank
go
you,
ahead.
everybody.
Thank
You're all the
you.
best.
Much.
Thank you for participating.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
I learned so
Thank you,
much.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
everybody.
Good night.
Good night. See you
Awesome.
next week.